right, welcome back to Craft Politics, everyone. We are here for a cheeky half, which means it's a short 15-minute episode. We are drinking. What are we drinking today?
We're drinking a Octopus Wants to Fight IPA, which is from the Great Lakes Brewery, because we're actually not at home in Vancouver. We are now in Toronto, where it's minus 13, and we've been dragged here for the week.
It's fucking miserably cold, but...
It is very cold. But it was better for you on the plane, wasn't it? Because you were in business class, of course.
It was
with
an
your
upgrade.
fancy la-di-da super elite. I was at the back in steerage. In fact, I think I was actually serving drinks on the plane. But it's okay. I'm not bitter. But as long as you got here comfortably.
I didn't partake in the champagne, though. I thought I'd save myself.
Oh, I'm glad. Well, the world rejoices.
Okay, we're going to do a quick wrap-up of last week's episode. We got some feedback. We met with our producers, Nada and Rita, and they had some really nice things to say about us, didn't they?
They were quite cruel, actually, because apparently I have a resting bitch face.
Yeah.
And my microphone was crap, so I now have a new microphone, but this one's not actually plugged in, so I could literally throw it away and it would still work. But just to prove I have so I had a bad microphone. Oh, and also I didn't have anything on my walls in my apartment, which apparently is a sign of something missing in my life. But mainly the resting bitch face. So this week I've had a haircut. I've used moisturising cream. I've had a little bit of Botox done. And
really?
No.
I guess it takes a while to settle in,
doesn't it?
I'm
not going to. Anyway, so I'm here now, and I was really happy for the feedback. But you were brilliant, apparently, so that's...
I'll take it.
So as long as it worked out for you. So I'm just going to smile weirdly at the camera now for the rest of the show. Right? So.
Right, pinch the cheeks.
Yeah, I'm going to.
Okay, the idea with the cheeky halves is we keep it short and snappy. We speak to a guest every other week, and so it is Inauguration Day. We are recording this a couple hours after President Trump got to the microphone and gave a bit of an interesting inauguration. Why don't I walk us through the highlights, and then we can try and make sense of it.
And we should talk about the beer as well at some point.
Yeah, we should talk about the beer. It is delicious. It's exceptionally hoppy, which I quite like. Trump began by declaring a national emergency south of the border. Yep. He's reinstating his Remain in Mexico policy, wants to send troops to the border. He's going to defeat inflation.
He's apparently also looking for a disease that he can use a 1942 piece of legislation to close the border. Apparently, so the BBC tells me.
Oh, is that so?
So yes, what else was there?
America will be a manufacturing giant.
Yep.
Once again.
We had the gender stuff.
Yeah, gender stuff. Well, I was going down my list. I was trying to see in what sequence that came in. But after he talked about trade, he talked about government efficiencies, an executive order to immediately stop all government censorship, law and order in our cities, and yes, his 8th item on the list, give or take, I may not have my math spot on, was to end government policy of trying to socially engineer race and gender to every aspect of public and private life. So it's an interesting mix of priorities.
Good luck with that.
What do you think about it?
Whenever I look at these things, I think of what would one of my political heroes have done in those circumstances. And I think back to Ronald Reagan, and you think about his inauguration speeches, which were about defeating communism, about projecting American power, really serious themes. And there's some stuff in here which I wouldn't disagree with, but when we're down to what I think are fairly base issues, some of them, and the whole gender thing, and some of his asides were just a bit strange, really, right? Like, of all the things, when you're trying to project this new American golden age, it's just this kind of mishmash of what that's just pulled from a lot of the new right, the new conservative thing of, well, we know what we're against, but not really what we're in favour of. And I don't disagree with everything he said, but it just, I just think. Somebody who grew up in the 80s, I want an American president who projects American values and American power, because those are Western values and Western power, which is important for all of us who care about democracy, care about the rule of law, all of these things that, were so important in the 80s as the fight. And, we're just kind of into this weird mishmash now. So, I don't know. What did you think?
Well, so first of all, he's not my style. The Trump brand of conservatism is just not what I subscribe to.
No.
I have a hard time with it. However, I'm trying to be a little bit more objective about this. And I think it would be a mistake in a global context, particularly in the West. So we're talking about Canada and the UK specifically, but you'll tell me if I'm wrong in the UK. I think it would be a mistake to look at what Trump said today as some Trumpism. And that is a purely American thing. I think he hit on so many notes that even if they are written for an American audience, the undertones of a lot of his core message will resonate outside of his own borders.
100%. And look, the immigration issue is a serious issue, which is affecting lots of Western countries, right? The huge changes that countries have seen, the inability to control immigration, the whole issue with illegal migration is an issue from, Poland to the UK, to France, to Germany, Canada, Australia. So absolutely important thing, which is why, some of what he said, I think, but also we would be wrong to dismiss this, right? Because this trend of Trumpism, whatever it is taking hold across much of the Western world, right? This kind of, this reactionary, more right-wing reactionary viewpoint is taking hold amongst particularly certain groups, right? We hear a lot about angry young men in this country and in the UK. So, it's not to be dismissed.
Yeah, and I think so much of the economic message to this, whether the antidote or the prescription that he has in mind is going to be the appropriate one, of course, probably not always going to be the case. But I think the feeling of being economically left behind, I think, is a resonant message in so many countries right now. Sure, it's got a twang about it right now. It doesn't sound the way many other leaders would say it, but I think it's going to. We've got to be careful not to be so dismissive about it.
And his brilliance, of course, is being able to tap into that and being what was actually, quite an incredible campaigner on this, this cycle. So, it's not to be sniffed at. And, these are, themes that are taking hold. By the way, if anyone can hear any noise, it's there's a crowd outside because they heard I was here, and this is what happened.
They heard crowd politics.
Because I don't know whether you know, Joseph, I used to be an MP,
right.
And I don't like to talk about it.
I forgot about that.
But sometimes, people turn up and, just either try and... So that's why there's a reception going on. So if there is a bit of noise, it's not our fault. Anyway, to continue on.
But to continue on, I'm curious if you have a view on how much... American allies need to mirror what Trump is putting in the window. And I think about, obviously, in the Canadian context, the most obvious one, because we are so close and so greatly affected by this. But, you see the speed with which the current federal caucus and cabinet are reacting to this, the degree to which the premiers of each of the provinces in Canada have come together to try to figure out what the response was going to be on the risk of tariffs. And, of course, that is the other big headline today. No tariffs coming immediately mentioned. But that could change tomorrow. It could change in 2 days. We don't know. But the speed with which everyone reacted, has been prepared to react on this, to me is an indicator of what's going to be required of anyone working in government in any of the key jurisdictions around the world, which is they're going to be expected to be hyper-responsive because there's no other way to manage this.
Yeah, and look, let's be honest. His very existence has resulted in the Canadian government actually taking some action on its own immigration issues, right, which have clearly been a festering sore in this country now for some time, right, as it has been across the West. The fentanyl stuff, the drug stuff, it took Trump coming into power for the government here to ramp up enforcement and all of the stuff coming through the ports and pouring across into the US. Now, that should have happened anyway, right? Fentanyl and all this, it destroys people's lives, but it took Trump. So, there is governments are going to have to respond around the world, and so they should, right? Because actually, perhaps I sounded too negative in my initial reaction to Trump stuff, because he's onto something, right? On lots of these things, he is onto something, and lots of governments have chosen not to address these festering sores in our societies, and that probably is why mainstream parties are either being taken over by, more harder elements, or are being replaced altogether by entirely new parties, right? So
I'm finding it interesting that all the provinces now in Canada are talking about, our response to this is we now need to break down interprovincial trade barriers. well, where the fuck was this
Yes.
5 years ago, 10 years ago? But so yes, the response, at least within Canada, is to find a way to become more competitive again, and that's going to require a lot of interprovincial trade, leaning into industries that can be successful in their own country. But it should not have required the election of Donald J. Trump to get us to this point.
Exactly.
And if I was, as a business owner, it's frustrating to have to see our government actors or elected officials waiting for absolute crises before they're taking the appropriate public policy responses that they need to take.
And I think that's just the nature of, sadly, governments across the West these days, right? Is it actually takes a disaster to force them into action because doing nothing is easier.
Yep.
Am I smiling enough, by the way? I just want to check
I
because
can't tell.
it's really starting to hurt my cheeks now when I'm trying to do this. But this just doesn't feel natural. So anyway,
we might have to take a screenshot of it and have
the more I drink,
vote.
the smilier I become, though. So this is good, and this is quite the strong beer, isn't it? What was it?
Could that be our poll of the week? Should we make it?
What's that?
Has Andrew Percy's resting bitch face improved?
Well, I don't think it will. I mean, but that could be a poll. I'll get my mother to vote.
That's not a guaranteed
I
positive
should probably
vote,
just
though, is
agree
it?
with it, actually. So.
I'm trying to figure out whether I'm slightly optimistic about what all this means I'm going to obviously for Canada specifically, but I think you can apply writ large, which is,
Well,
he talked about at the end we're going to win again, and that to me is the language of someone who treats everything as a transaction and as a deal, and the fact that he doesn't have tariffs immediately today could be because he wants to find the best deal, and that best deal may not be an automatic 25% tariff applied across the board. But I think that means it should be an optimistic sign, as unpredictable as he is, that if you can structure your engagement with him or his administration as a deal, then there might be some wiggle room there.
Well, and I think three things come straight to mind, right? First of all, the immigration issue, right? Okay, already Canada's responded to that, so there'll be action there. But in terms of wins for Canada, right, have Donald Trump buy into Canadian energy, right? Because all this stuff around the whole trade gap and the deficit and all the rest of it, a lot of that's based around the oil and gas exports from this country to the United States, right? So actually, do a deal with Trump around that, buy him into it, right? Buy him into getting Canadian energy. And then thirdly, it would be a good thing if this country made good on its commitments around military spending, right? Because we're seeing increasing incursions into the Arctic. That's a direct threat to Canadian sovereignty. We've seen obviously what's happened in Europe over the last couple of years. So maybe Trump will force Canada and other countries around the world that aren't living up to the international commitments they made across the West to live up to those commitments. And that's got to be better, because a stronger West is the best way of deterring some of the common enemies we have, who hate everything we stand for, hate our values, hate our democracy, hate our systems of government and indeed trade. So maybe he's a deal maker, right? So maybe there's a deal to be done on three fronts there.
And I wonder too, are we all just getting all worked up for no good reason? I mean, I've seen some commentary out there about him just being a quote-unquote lame duck president, because he's got about a 2-year window before things could start to turn.
2 years into this presidency, there'll be midterm elections. We all know the general trend of what happens with those. But also, it's looking to the next Republican candidate. And also, I think there is a little bit... People really lost their shit last time, right? And then we got to the end of the 4 years. And I think for a lot of people, we thought, not actually... for all, the words that were used by, including some people in the UK at the time, like about him being a fascist and all this lot, this kind of over-the-top language. And we got to the end of the 4 years, and America was still there, democracy was still there, the, institutions were still strong. Although there's an interesting thing in one of the articles we saw earlier, this poll saying that a majority of I think civil servants would defy an order from Trump, even if it was a legal order, if they disagreed with it. Now, that is not acceptable, right? And that is really quite dangerous we saw a bit of this in the UK, actually, in the last couple of years we were in power, particularly when we were trying to do things like the Rwanda policy, where you had civil servants actively trying to prevent policy happening. And that's that is quite dangerous when you get into that situation of a democratically elected president being unable to deliver on the things he promised. So I think that is a real risk.
Well, when I think about this question of whether it's just a 2-year thing or even a 4-year thing, I keep coming back to I feel like anyone who read Hillbilly Elegy in 2016 or 2017, whenever it came out, would have read that book and understood, not that J.D. Vance would become the next vice president, but more importantly, the undercurrents that he covered in that book are the undercurrents that were largely attributed to why Trump's message was resonant in the 2016 cycle. But the issues underlying those communities that are talked about, right? So we're in Appalachian parts of the U.S. We're talking about the Ohio Rust Belt. All these places have not seen a transformative net benefit gain. They're not that much better off today than they were in 2016. And so, to me, reading that book in that time would have surfaced the fact that this is not something that ends with one election cycle. So yes, Trump didn't win the next election cycle, but those issues, those same communities, those same voters probably still felt that there was a long road to go before they were going to get what they wanted. And so the whiplash response was even greater as a result when you put in a 4-year interval. And I wonder if the effects that have taken us here today are effects that are going to take a lot more than just more than half of a term. And so,
I mean, it's unclear, right, where it ends, where this whole movement ends, right? That it's because I say it's a movement that's happening across the West. So yeah, I mean, Trump is not going to be able to address those in 4 years, right? So the question is, what comes next, and that's where it'll be very interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we've tried to make sense of the inauguration. What do we think of this beer?
I think it's a very good beer.
Yeah.
I mean,
so Great Lakes Brewery.
If
you guys are looking to sponsor a podcast, we're looking for a beer sponsor.
Yeah, well, I first had this years ago, actually, when I was first given this by our Consul General when I was the trade envoy, because I don't really know, I used to be an MP.
Were you once an MP?
Yes, I was an MP. And I came here, and this was one of the beers we had, and I can't remember, we went somewhere near the residence, and this was one of the first beers I got, so it was a really good, and I rated it very well then, so it's a nice beer.
Well, for those who can't partake, how would we describe this beer? You start, of course, with the visual description. So it's a nice pale color. It's slight haziness. So
but it's got much more of a Westy taste, hasn't it? It's
Westy like being, we got to translate that for people.
Oh yeah, so West Coast ale. So piney, resinous.
Yeah.
Very bittered, very hoppy. Bitter. It's dank. Is a good Yorkshire word that we'd use.
Yorkshire word.
Dank.
Yeah.
It's a good dank beer.
Dank. So yeah, super bitter, resinous. Pine, I'm agreeing with that. Very drinkable.
It's very drinkable. I've drank more of it than you.
How would you rate it?
I gave it on Untapped. Although we did agree we'd never rate beers on here, but I did give it a 4, which is a very high praise from me. So
I'd give this 4 out of 5 stars.
It's a good beer.
It's good. Okay, well, and an appropriate one. Octopus wants to fight. I think everyone's in for a bit of a fight. Whatever side of the political spectrum you find yourself in, whether you're trying to prevent tariffs or fighting legal battles on what genders.
Are you not going to share your rant of the week before we end then?
What?
Do you not have a rant of the week?
No, I can't remember having one.
Oh,
what's your rant of the week?
My rant of the week, because we talked about this earlier, but then Joseph got into his business class seat and forgot about it. But my rant of the week, I have 2 rants of the week. One is political, the other is more personal. My political rant of the week is, I don't know whether you saw, there's a Liberal leadership contest going on as well, which we didn't have time to talk to. Maybe we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
But Chrystia Freeland had her launch.
Yes.
Right? And she was interrupted by lots of pro-Palestinian protesters. And what annoyed me about that was lots of people took to social media saying, isn't it awful that her speech got interrupted and this is terrible? Now, it is terrible on one level, but actually, as somebody who's a proud member of the Jewish community, for months and months and months now, lots of people have been having protests in their communities where nothing's happened in targeting Jewish communities. So actually, if there is going to be a protest, it should absolutely be a political event, not near a Jewish community facility or neighbourhood. So that was my one rant, that all these people were suddenly getting very angry that Chrystia Freeland's lots of Liberal politicians are coming out, who had nothing to say about the protests in Jewish neighbourhoods. So that was my one rant. And then my second rant was, can we please have more airlines than Air Canada? in this country. Please. I mean, I love Air Canada, and if they're listening, I would like super elite status. But that was my other rant of the week, because it's very expensive to fly anywhere in this country.
Well, we'll just have to...
It's all right for you, because, you know...
Because I'm super elite.
So those are my two
Which
rants
are words no politician... I guess you're an elected former... You're a former
I did
elected
used
politician.
to be an MP, but, you know...
But I think politicians in this country have a bad record of bad publicity around them when they insist that they have super elite status. And
I can't imagine an elected politician ever doing anything wrong. So this is this is something I just find very difficult to comprehend. But anyway, we shall see. So we're back next week.
Back next week for a full episode, and we're going to have a special guest back on the show. And we're going to have a lot more to talk about on the first week post-Trump. And then I think, we'll spend some time talking about the Liberal leadership race. Take stock where we're at.
And we'll be back in Vancouver.
Thank God.
It might be raining, but it will be warmer.
It won't be minus 15 and blistering off your face.
Yes, it's very, very cold here.
Yeah. Okay.
Great.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.
Enjoy the beer.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
We'll get back. We'll finish these beers.
Am I smiling, right? Smiling.